By January, my world usually narrowed to checklists and cold metal. I worked winter patrol for the state park outside Grayling, a spread of white pine, cedar swamp, frozen two-track roads, and posted signs half buried in drifts. Summer brought campers, canoes, drunk arguments over firewood permits, and all the noise people could carry into a quiet place. Winter was cleaner, fewer people, simpler problems. Snowmobile trespass, windfall across service roads, broken trail camera batteries, maybe a stranded hiker with bad boots and good intentions. I liked the repetition because repetition meant control. Most mornings I woke at 5:30 in the Ranger duplex at the park boundary. 2 units built in the 80s with thin walls and practical everything. I had the west unit and no neighbor that season. The east side sat dark, pipes winterized, my kitchen light threw a yellow square over the snow while I drank coffee black enough to scrape paint and listened to the weather band crackle out lake effect warnings I already knew by the ache in my knees. By 6:15, I was in my truck, thermos riding shotgun, shovel and recovery boards in back, radio mic clipped to my coat. My route rarely changed. North Loop first, check culverts and drift depth markers. Then the boardwalk near Pickerel Marsh, where people ignored closures and tried to cut through because they saw a flat line on a map. Trail cams at stations 4, 7, and 9. Signage checks near the river corridor. At noon, I'd park where the service road opened to a slope above frozen tamarack and eat whatever Mara had bullied me into taking from Sunday dinner. Venison chili in a wide-mouth jar, turkey sandwich wrapped in wax paper, one bruised apple she knew I'd forget unless she packed it herself. That was the shape of my life. Practical, measured, mostly silent. If I needed conversation, I got it in town. Nolan met me for coffee 2 or 3 mornings a week at a place with cracked vinyl booths and a chalkboard menu nobody read because everyone ordered the same thing. He'd done 20 years in fire before his shoulder gave out, and now he taught high school shop with the same command voice he used to clear a room. He called me Smokey whenever he thought I was being too serious. "You ever smile on purpose?" he asked me once, stirring sugar into coffee he didn't need sugar in. "Or do you wait until dispatch orders it?" "Can't risk it," I told him. "Could trigger an avalanche." He laughed too loud, slapped the table, and the old men by the window smirked into their mugs like they'd heard the joke before. Sundays were Mara's. Her farmhouse sat 15 minutes south on a county road lined with old maples and mailboxes listing sideways in the frost. She had 2 boys, 3 dogs, a husband who worked nights at the mill, and an iron belief that no one should eat alone in winter. I'd pull in at 4, get tackled by nephews who smelled like wet wool and crayons, and spend 2 hours being informed of school politics and chicken behavior while Mara stirred something on the stove big enough to feed a platoon. "Take leftovers," she'd say every time, already filling containers. "And don't tell me no, Drake. You can't live on gas station jerky and Ranger pride." "It was artisanal jerky," I'd say, "handcrafted." "By what, a raccoon?" Then she'd soften, like she always did, right before I left, and ask if I was sleeping okay, eating enough, seeing anyone, talking to anyone besides Nolan and people requesting permit maps. I'd give her the same half-truth. "I'm fine, work steady, winter's quiet." She never believed me all the way, but she let me go with 2 bags of food and a warning to drive slow where wind carved black ice over the bridge. Evenings at the duplex were ritual. Radio check at 8. Wood stove fed by 9, boots by the door on a rubber mat, laces loosened but not undone all the way in case I needed them fast. I kept a cheap notebook on the counter for snow depth totals and maintenance reminders, because memory gets slippery when days look the same. Before bed, I always looked out the front window. White pines bowed under weight. My porch light cutting a clean cone through spinning flakes. The feeder pole by the steps with a little queue of chickadees in the morning, and red poles when it got really cold. I topped it every other day. Tiny habit. Pointless, maybe. Still felt like proof the place. And I were in agreement. That's why I noticed when the agreement broke. The first morning there were no birds. I told myself the wind had shifted feeding patterns. Nothing dramatic. A gusty night can push them to sheltered timber where cones hold seed. Second morning, still empty, I blamed the seed mix and made a note to pick up black oil sunflower in town. Third morning, not a single chickadee. No nuthatch creeping down the pine bark. No flutter on the feeder tray, and the quiet around my porch had a hollow quality to it, like a room after someone leaves during an argument. I stood there with my coffee steaming against my face and listened hard. Nothing. Normally around dusk, the coyotes along the river gave themselves away, not every night, but often enough. A high yip from the east bank, an answer from the ridge. Then the whole pack, stitching the dark together with noise. That week, dead silence. No calls at dusk, no distant barks. Just wind combing through cedar and the little dry clicks old trees make when temperature drops fast. At work, I kept it rational. Wildlife shifts. Prey moves. Predators follow. Temperature inversion can carry sound weird. Snow depth changes travel corridors. I logged what I saw, because that's what you do when you don't have answers. You gather data and wait for patterns. Patterns showed up anyway. Trail Cam 7 watched a cut line near thick timber, where deer usually passed in 2s and 3s, heads down, feeding and moving. The timestamp from 2:13 showed 12 deer bunched shoulder to shoulder in frame, all facing the same direction, ears pinned forward. Not one was feeding. Not one turned toward the camera flash. They stood like they were waiting for a signal, eyes blown wide, white breath hanging. At 2:14, the next frame caught only hindquarters and kicked snow as the whole group detonated out of view in one direction. I scrubbed the footage 3 times in the station office and leaned toward the monitor like proximity would reveal what they had seen. The background was black cedar, fixed and ordinary. No eye shine, no shape. But I'd watched enough deer to know panic when I saw it. That wasn't random spook and scatter. That was consensus terror. When I showed Nolan the stills at coffee, he squinted, shrugged, and said, "Could be wolves." "Could be," I said, though wolves usually left cleaner signs than what I was finding. He handed my phone back. "You're out there alone too much, Smokey. Winter gets into your head." "Yeah," I said, "maybe." Mara was less gentle when I mentioned the missing birds over dinner. "You've been reading that cryptid garbage again, haven't you?" I looked up from mashed potatoes. "I read one article about winter predator pressure." She pointed her fork at me like a teacher catching a lie. "Last year you sent me a link called 7 Michigan Creatures Hunters Won't Name After Dark." "Do not make that face," I remember. It was satire. You're impressionable when you don't sleep. Pretty sure that's not how impressionable works. She exhaled, softened. I just don't want you inventing monsters because it's lonely out there. I laughed and changed the subject, but her words stuck with me anyway. Inventing. 3 days later, I found the first print that didn't fit. It was on the maintenance road west of the old pump house, laid in powder over hardpack, where snowmobiles hadn't cut through yet. At first glance, canine. 4 toes, heel pad, direct register pattern in a line. But the size hit me as soon as I crouched. Bigger than my spread hand, wider than any coyote, longer than local wolf averages by a margin I didn't like. The impression sank deep, deeper than it should have for surface crust that held my own weight with only a slight break. Stride length measured around 62 inches in spots, where drift didn't obscure it. Wolves can stretch, sure, but this looked less like stretch and more like a thing be built for distance. I took photos with scale markers, then measured again because numbers felt safer than reactions. 10 3/4 inches from heel to front toe in the cleanest print. Nearly 5 inches wide. Toe tips pointed with claw marks. But the claw gouges were long and narrow, almost hooked. I told myself thaw distortion, compaction, overlapping tracks. 2 animals stepping nearly in line could create weird geometry. Drift edges can lie to you. I followed the line for maybe 80 yards before it cut into cedar where understory swallowed detail. No blood, no hair, no drag sign, just prints appearing and disappearing through shade. Back at the station, I mixed dental stone from the evidence kit and made 2 casts before temperature dropped. I wrapped them in towels on the passenger floor and drove them home, like I was transporting eggs. That night at 8 o'clock radio check, my voice sounded normal. At 9 o'clock wood stove fed, boots drying by the door, I told myself all over again, big wolf, distorted by weather. I even drafted an email to a DNR biologist I trusted, attached photos, asked for a second set of eyes. His reply came the next afternoon. Likely distortion from melt and drift. Hard to conclude from photos alone. Keep logging. There it was. Rational answer with official tone. Exactly what I should have wanted. I didn't feel better. Because on the way back from checking Station 9, I found another line of prints in fresh snow where there had been no tracks an hour earlier. Not strange by itself. Animals move. But these started at the edge of a clearing like something had stepped out from dense pine, crossed open ground in a near straight line, circled once around a downed birch, and then ended in a stretch of untouched powder with no visible exit. I walked widening spirals around the last impression, probing with my pole for crust breaks, searching for wind-scoured continuation. Nothing. Clean snow for 20 yards in every direction until my own boot marks shredded it. By then the weather had turned brittle. Days stayed pewter gray, nights clear and vicious, stars hard as nails over the treetops. Sound carried in strange ways. A branch snapping a quarter-mile out seemed to crack right behind my shoulder. Then whole minutes passed with no noise at all, as if the woods were holding breath. I started doing extra perimeter checks around the duplex before dark. Habit, I told myself. Good practice. I looked for easy things first. Human footprints, tire tracks, signs of prankers from town with too much time and not enough sense. I found none. The snow around my unit remained mostly clean, except for my own path from truck to porch. Rabbit scribbles near the woodpile and occasional squirrel hop marks by the feeder, still untouched by birds. Then came the morning that changed the temperature of everything. I opened the inner door before dawn, shoulder into the cold, and my porch light clicked on over a field of new snow so smooth it looked poured. For 1 second I thought I was seeing shadows wrong. Then my eyes adjusted. Tracks crossed my yard. They came from the tree line at the property edge, straight over open ground, no hesitation, each impression deep and deliberate. Same pattern as before. Canine structure, absurd scale, long stride. They climbed my 3 porch steps as if the thing hadn't even noticed the rise. And they stopped at my front door. Not just near it, at it. The lead impressions were set square in front of the threshold, angled inward. Snow was scuffed there, compressed hard, like weight had shifted from foot to foot while whatever made those prints stood listening through wood and weather strip. I don't remember setting my coffee down. I only remember the heat from the mug suddenly on my knuckles because I was gripping it too tight. I backed up into the mudroom, grabbed my flashlight, came back out, and inspected every inch like procedure could bleach out fear. No human tracks, no snowshoe marks, no drag lines from a prank mold. The prints that reached my porch were crisp at the edges, newer than the overnight wind crust, and there was no parallel disturbance suggesting 2 animals overlaying. From the porch, they turned left, dropped to the yard, made a full circuit of the duplex, and headed toward the stand of pines behind the propane tank. I followed them 10 yards. At 11 yards, they vanished. Not faded, not drifted. Vanished at a line where the snow lay unbroken and clean beneath a blue pre-dawn light. Beyond that line, nothing but still woods and the black verticals of pine trunks, fading into dark. I stood there long enough for my eyelashes to ice together. Somewhere far off, a tree popped in the cold. No birds answered. No coyote called. When I finally went back inside, I locked both doors. Though I never did that in daylight, and for the first time since I took that posting, my own routine stopped feeling like safety and started feeling like bait. I stood in the mudroom with my gloves still on, keys in my hand, both locks thrown, staring at the door like it might answer a question if I looked hard enough. It didn't. Cold leaked through the seams, and the house made its normal noises. Stove tick, pipe knock, the low whine of wind at the eaves. But none of it sounded normal anymore. I forced myself to do what I always did when something felt wrong. Break it into steps. I took photos first. Porch, threshold, each print on each step with a ruler laid across the widest point. Then I changed batteries in the camera and took them again because my hands were shaking and I didn't trust the first set. I logged the time in the notebook, then wrote it again in block letters because the first line looked like someone else's handwriting. I told myself out loud in an empty kitchen, there is an explanation. It sounded thin. By full daylight, I had a better look, and better made it worse. The impressions at my door were deep enough that old porch paint flaked where nails had pressed into packed snow over wood. There were tiny arcs where claws had scored and slipped. Not a paw stamp pressed in a mold, not decorative. Dynamic pressure, weight shift. The kind of little detail you only get when a living thing adjusts balance. I walked the circuit of the duplex with a probe pole and shovel. Maybe someone had approached from the county road and backtracked in his own prints. Maybe snow had drifted in, weird, and erased a normal entry path. Maybe a big dog had gone wild and someone had encouraged the story with fake prints. Every maybe lasted about 30 seconds and fell apart at the same place. No approach tracks except from the tree line. No exit tracks beyond the pines. Nothing human, nothing mechanical, no dragged ladder, no rope marks, no sign of prankers with too much talent. Still, I kept adding possibilities because the alternatives were worse. Bear? Wrong season and less disturbed den, and the print structure was wrong. Bears register 5 toes and a broader pad, different gait, different claw spread. Also, no bear I'd seen stood at a door like a process server. Dog? Some enormous mastiff mix, maybe, off-leash, moving oddly through crust. But the stride was too long and too consistent. And dogs don't vanish at 11 yards in open snow without a trace unless they have access to helicopters. Person? A person in carved snowshoes designed to imitate tracks. I checked for compression patterns between prints where a human might have stepped or hopped. Nothing. I knelt and brushed powder from print walls with a paintbrush I used for camera housings. The edges stayed sharp, stratified by pressure like normal track formation, not stamped from above. By then I was late getting en route, so I called the station from the truck before I left the driveway. Dispatch picked up sleepy voice, and I gave a trimmed version. Large unknown tracks around Ranger Duplex. Repeated occurrence. Requesting additional set of eyes when available. Copy unknown tracks, she said. You want county contacted? I looked back at my porch through the windshield at the marks on the steps. Negative for now. I'll document and forward. No one says no one believes you. It's subtler than that. A pause a fraction too long. A polite tone wrapped around dismissal. I heard it by noon when I showed my supervisor the prints on my camera. He pinched the bridge of his nose, zoomed in, frowned, then gave me the practical smile people use when they're humoring an anxious relative. Big canine? Distorted substrate? We've had weird freeze-thaw even when it feels steady. You're in drift country there? No thaw overnight, I said. Single digits, minimal wind until around dawn. Could still be settlement, could be overlap, could be someone messing with you. Someone walked up to my door on fake feet and then evaporated. He let out a breath. Drake, I'm not saying that. I'm saying don't get spun up. Increase lighting, check your perimeter, keep notes. I wanted to tell him I had notes, casts, photos, timestamps, and a growing catalog of impossible geometry. Instead, I said, copy. On break, I called the DNR biologist again, the same one who had replied with melt and drift. He answered this time, wind noise behind him. Tell me this as if I'm stubborn, I said. Could freeze conditions create a canine track nearly 11 inches long and make stride read around 62 inches repeatedly? He was quiet for a second. Could? An ugly enough substrate, yes. Should? Not usually, you said, and near your residence now? Front door. Could be wolf with a movement disorder or injury changing register. Could be 2 wolves crossing in line at different times. Could be domestic hybrid. Could any of those explain tracks ending abruptly? Wind scouring can do strange things. Sun crust, too. There was no sun. Another pause. I can look at Cass if you drop them. I already made 2. Bring them in and Drake. Get more sleep. Winter pattern recognition can go sideways when you're run down. I thanked him because he was trying to be helpful. Then I ended the call and sat in the truck with my forehead on the steering wheel for a full minute, listening to the tick of the engine cooling. At coffee the next morning, Nolan took one look at my face and said, "You look like a man who found taxes in his mailbox." I slid my phone across the table without speaking. He scrolled through pictures of porch prints, zoomed, pinched, leaned back. That's a big dog. Not a dog. Wolf, then. Wolves don't come to doors. He shrugged. Wolves go where food is. Maybe you smell like venison chili and loneliness. Funny. Drake. His voice shifted, the old command edge coming out. You're wound tight. I spent 20 years in fire, watching good people see threat in every smoke ribbon after a bad call. Your system's running hot. That doesn't mean you're wrong. It means slow down before you decide what it is. I wanted to argue. Instead, I stared at the sugar caddy and said, "It stood at my door." He didn't laugh this time. Then put up brighter lights, motion alarm, keep your phone on, call me if you get anything else. But don't go chasing tracks alone at 2 a.m. trying to prove something. Mara reacted exactly the way I expected and still wasn't ready for. She had me at the farmhouse that Sunday, pressed leftovers into my hands, then cornered me by the sink while her boys argued over whose turn it was to feed one of the 3 dogs. You are not staying out there alone if something's circling your place. I'm not moving in because of tracks. Then I'm coming to your place. You hate the duplex. I hate the idea of getting a call from county saying my brother did something stubborn. I kept my voice even. I'm doing procedure. Your procedure is always isolate and pretend it's manageable. Her husband came in from the porch, lunch pail in hand, ready for another night at the mill. He looked between us and said, "Careful." Could set up a couple trail cams by his steps. Might help. I already am, I said. Mara folded her arms. And if you catch something? I looked toward the window over her sink, where dark came early and hard in winter. Then I'll know. By Monday, I had 3 additional cameras mounted around the duplex. One over the porch line, one on the corner aimed toward the propane tank and stand of pines, one low on a post facing the driveway. I installed a cheap motion light over the back and swapped the porch bulb to a brighter LED that made the snow glare like bone. I checked batteries twice daily. I logged every pass through my own yard, every squirrel mark, every rabbit line, every drift shift after wind events. I was trying to drown fear in paperwork. It worked right up until the first night I saw eyes. It was just after midnight when the generator hiccuped. Not a full failure, just that ugly stutter where power dipped and came back, hard enough to make the kitchen clock blink. I was awake anyway, lying on top of the blankets with boots nearby because sleep had become shallow and strategic. I threw on my coat, grabbed my headlamp, and stepped out into cold so sharp it felt like broken glass in my nose. The world had that dead, high-pressure stillness that comes with brutal temperatures. No wind, no branch movement. Snow under my boots as squeaking loud as foam insulation. My breath rose in steady plumes while I walked the side path toward the utility box and small generator housing behind the duplex. Light from my headlamp cut a narrow tunnel through floating crystals. I popped the housing, checked fuel line, tapped the side panel, listened. It settled into a normal hum after 20 seconds. Routine, solvable, mechanical. Then I stood up and swept the lamp across the cedar edge out of habit. 2 reflections snapped back at me. Amber. Not white like retro-reflective tape. Not green like some cat eye shine. Deep amber like old warning lights behind dirty glass. They hung in the dark at roughly the height of my own head, plus another 2 feet. Around 7 feet off the snow if I judged right. Too high for deer unless one was somehow standing on a buried stump. Too high and too broad in spacing for coyote, fox, dog. Too far apart for owl at that distance. I froze so completely my knees locked. The eyes didn't bob, didn't blink, didn't jerk away like an animal caught in beam. They were level and intent, fixed on me with a steadiness that felt wrong in my bones. "Hey," I heard myself say, as if naming something could shrink it. "Get out." No response. No snort, no rustle, no stomp. I thumbed my lamp to a higher setting. The beam brightened, reached, and still gave me only those 2 points suspended in cedar shadow. Whatever held them was blacker than the black around it. I took 1 step backward and my heel hit packed snow near the path. The reflection slid sideways. Not a startle run, not a bound. A smooth lateral movement controlled, almost gliding through trunks, where I should have seen branches shake. The points drifted left maybe 10 feet, then stopped again and leveled on me. My skin went cold under layers that were already at 0. I yanked the flashlight from my pocket with my offhand and added a second beam, wider spill. Nothing. Trees, snow-laden boughs, trunk columns, no body. But the eyes remained, now partly masked, then clear again between 2 cedars, as if whatever carried them knew exactly how to use cover. My brain started throwing explanations at panic speed. Reflection from my own lamp on ice. A pair of reflective markers someone had nailed to a post. 2 raccoons lined up by coincidence. I lowered the light, raised it, changed angle. The amber points dimmed, flared, then locked in again at the same impossible height. I took another step back. They moved with me. Not forward, just enough to hold line of sight. Predatory behavior from every training scenario I'd ever read, filtered through a rural Michigan night where this should not be happening. I didn't run at first. I backed toward the mudroom door, shoulders square, lamp on the eyes, boot feeling for each step in reverse. At the stoop, I slapped the wall switch for the floodlight. White halogen poured across the yard and clipped the cedar line. The reflections vanished instantly. I stood there panting into my scarf, light trembling in my hand hard enough to jitter shadows across the siding. I waited for movement, for a sound, for anything to prove I had not hallucinated 2 floating coins in the dark. Nothing answered. Inside, I locked both doors and killed the interior lights, except the kitchen. Then I watched from the window for almost an hour with a shotgun across my lap, telling myself the eyes were a visual artifact, a weird angle, maybe deer behind a rise. Maybe 2 separate animals that happened to align. At 1:22, I put on boots again and went out with a tape measure. I walked to the cedar edge where I'd seen the reflections, marked the spot where I'd been standing by the generator, and triangulated approximate eye height against a branch notch and tree scar. Even correcting for slope and my own margin error, the line put those eyes far above any 4-legged animal standing normally on the snowpack. There were impressions at the tree line by morning, but wind had started and powder had sifted in, softening edges into ambiguity. I photographed what I could and hated every picture because each one could be explained away if you wanted it to be. At coffee, I didn't tell Nolan. At Mara's, I didn't tell Mara. At the station, I wrote possible large predator movement near duplex perimeter. Visual contact inconclusive. Inconclusive. That word felt like lying and self-defense at once. The next night I stayed inside after dusk. The night after that I forced myself to do the normal perimeter walk at 8:40 because routine was the last thing I had left that resembled control. I kept repeating a sentence in my head while I checked each camera. You saw light on ice. You saw light on ice. You saw light on ice. I almost believed it. 2 nights later, the moon came out hard and bright after a day of low cloud, turning everything into sharp contrast, Snowfields glowing, tree lines cut black and precise, shadows with edges like knives. Visibility was excellent, which should have made me feel better. It didn't. I had a maintenance call to inspect a drifted section near the frozen service road that ran past the old pump house and looped toward Station 9. I delayed until early evening, hoping any trespass riders would be off trail. By the time I got there, the world had gone silver blue, temperature dropping fast. I parked where the road opened into a clearing, maybe 80 yards across. Snowbanks shoulder high from plow passes earlier in the season. I left the truck idling because the heater core was temperamental and because an engine running feels like company when you're alone in winter timber. As I stepped out, moonlight laid a wide, pale plain over the roadbed between the banks. Trees on either side stood in black ranks, and above them the sky was bright enough to read contour without a lamp. I was checking the drift marker when movement cut across my left peripheral. A shape passed between snowbank and clearing. Not fast, not slow, intentional. I turned fully and saw it in profile against that moonlit strip for maybe 2 seconds, maybe less. Enough. At first, my brain tagged man in heavy winter gear, because upright silhouette is where human pattern matching goes first. Then scale corrected everything at once. Shoulders too broad, head thrust forward on a neck that seemed too thick, too long. Arms, if they were arms, hung low and angled wrong. The top of it stood above the bank where a man would have been chest high. It took 3 upright strides, long and smooth, each step eating distance without the bounce of a person in deep snow. Then, in a motion that made my stomach turn over, it dropped. Not fell, transitioned. Hips lowered, spine pitched. Forelimbs taking load as it switched from bipedal stride to a low lope in 2 fluid steps and disappeared behind the far bank into timber shadow. No stumble, no scramble, no awkwardness, built for both. I stayed exactly where I was, one hand on the drift marker, the other on the truck door handle I did not remember reaching for. My pulse hammered so hard it blurred the edges of my vision. I listened for crashing brush, branch snap, anything to map where it had gone. Silence. Then, after several long seconds, a muffled thud deeper in trees. Another, heavy but controlled. Then nothing. I got in the truck and locked the doors, feeling stupid the second I did because if it wanted in, locks were theater. I swept floodlights across both sides of the road, slow arcs, while breathing through my nose like I was on an SCBA drill with Nolan years back. Light struck trunks, snow curtains, drifting crystals, no body, no eyes. Large elk, I said out loud, voice rough. Moose, maybe. Optical compression from moon shadow. Neither explanation survived contact with memory. Elk aren't resident there. Moose movement that far south happens, but not like that and not with that shoulder profile. Bears don't transition from upright to quadrupedal with that speed in deep crust, unless physics takes a holiday. Humans don't drop and lope like that outside a horror movie or severe injury scenario. I sat there anyway and built denial like sandbags. Distance error, contrast illusion, fatigue, hypervigilance primed by tracks, and the night at the generator. I had been sleeping in slices. I had been scanning for threat. People see what they're afraid of. It was probably a normal animal distorted by light and expectation. Probably got me through the drive back. At the duplex, I checked every lock twice, then pulled camera cards with numb fingers and reviewed footage in the kitchen while the stove clicked. Nothing on the exact time window except blowing snow and my own truck lights. Camera angles can miss things. Motion sensors can fail in cold. I knew that. I also knew how bad it looked when evidence kept arriving, just short of proof. At 8 o'clock, I completed radio check in a voice that sounded borrowed. At 9 o'clock, I fed the wood stove out of habit and set my boots on the mat exactly aligned, toes toward the door, because rituals still mattered even when they stopped working. Before bed, I stood at the front window and stared at the white pines, bowed over the yard. The feeder hung motionless. No chickadees, no red poles, no coyote chorus from the river corridor. Just moonlight and my porch, and the place where tracks had ended at my threshold, like a deliberate knock. I went to the notebook and wrote for a full page, then crossed out half of it. Final line I left uncrossed. Could be stress, could be shadows, could be anything except what it looked like. I read that sentence 3 times, shut the notebook, and told myself it was true, until I could almost hear belief in it. I set the notebook on the table and kept my hand on it a second longer than I needed to, like pressure could pin the words in place. The stove ticked as metal cooled. Wind combed the siding in dry, whispering passes. I told myself to go to bed, and I did. Lights out, hallway light on low, shotgun propped where I could reach it if a branch came through the glass. Sleep never really happened. I drifted in and out of shallow, bright dreams, where I was walking the north loop and every trail marker pointed back to my own front steps. Around midnight, I came up hard from one of those half sleeps because the duplex made a sound it had never made before. Not a creak, not a pipe knock, but a single heavy impact somewhere outside, like a packed sandbag dropped from waist height onto frozen ground. I stayed still and counted to 10. Nothing. Then a faint scrape from the east side, drawn out and deliberate. Wood on something hard. I rolled out of bed, pulled on thermal pants and my jacket, and stood in the mudroom listening. My breath was loud in my own ears. The windows were black mirrors. I killed the hallway light so I could see out and went to the front room. The porch was empty, but to the right, past the propane tank, I caught motion where the equipment shed sat in the dark. A deeper dark crossing dark. Not fast, not spooked. Controlled. The floodlight switch by the sink only covered the near yard. I needed the truck beams for the side angle. Every nerve in me said stay inside, lock down, wait for daylight. Procedure said identify source, document, avoid confrontation. I hated that both options felt like guesses now. I grabbed keys, flare gun, and radio, cracked the inner door, then the outer, and moved to the truck in 3 quick steps that felt like crossing an open stage. Snow squeaked under my boots, loud as snapped styrofoam in the cold. I got in, hit lock, and started the engine. Headlights washed the porch. Nothing. I thumbed on floods and swung the wheel slightly to throw a wider beam toward the shed and the stand of pines behind the propane tank. At first, all I saw was blown crystals and old drifts cut by shadow. Then the beam caught a shape at the shed corner. Side profile for maybe a second and a half, long enough to burn itself into me. Muzzle first, long, narrow. The front rimed white with frost, like it had been breathing in sub-zero air for hours. Not broad and blunt like a bear. Not coyote fine either. Longer, heavier through the bridge. An ear lifted and flattened in the same motion, triangular and tight to the skull. Then the shoulder rolled forward and the forelimb came into view. It wasn't a paw. It planted like a hand, palm first, then fingers splayed for grip. black, curved nails biting into ice with a dry click. I heard even through the idling engine. 5 digits. Maybe 4 in a dew claw. My brain kept trying to correct the image into something cataloged, something from a field guide. It wouldn't fit. The limb flexed with too much articulation, elbow set too low, wrist rotating as it shifted weight. Fur along the arm and torso showed as dark gray bands under the white light. But at the flank there was a patch where fur thinned to skin. Pale, rough, cross-hatched, like old burn scarring. My mouth went dry so fast my tongue stuck to my teeth. I forgot the radio in my hand, forgot to breathe for a beat. The head turned toward me, not startled, not curious. A measured turn as if I had finally entered the room. Amber eyes caught the beam and flared. But there was focus behind the reflection this time, not just light bounce. It looked at me the way a dog might look at a latch before deciding whether it can work it open. Then it moved. 2 steps. Silent except for nail ticks on crust, and it slid behind the propane tank where the beam couldn't follow without me pulling forward. Instinct screamed not to advance. I flooded horn instead. 3 blasts. Hard. Sound punched across the yard and into timber. No crash of retreat, no scramble. Just one soft thud from somewhere beyond the tank. And then nothing. I sat gripping the wheel until my fingers cramped. The heater blew lukewarm air that smelled like old dust and antifreeze. My pulse knocked in my throat hard enough to make each swallow hurt. I kept the lights trained there for almost 10 minutes, maybe longer. Snow drifted through the beams. No shape reappeared. When I finally backed to the porch, I kept the floodlights on and moved backward to the door, eyes locked on the shed corner. Inside, I locked both doors and the mudroom deadbolt and stood with my back to the steel, trying to force my breathing down with the same 4-count drill Nolan taught rookies in smokehouses. In the kitchen light, my hands looked wrong, shaking so hard the flare gun rattled against the counter. I set it down before I dropped it and keyed the radio. "Dispatch, Unit West Duplex," I said. My voice sounded thin. "Possible large predator near residence. Repeat proximity event." A pause. Static hiss. Then dispatch came back, calm and practiced. "Copy, West Duplex. Any immediate threat? Any injury?" I looked through the front window at the empty porch and said, "No injury. Unknown location currently. I'm secure inside." I almost added, "I saw its hand. I swallowed that whole. Copy, secure, log event, and call if it returns." That was it. No siren, no deputy, no team rolling out to glass the tree line. Single digits in the middle of nowhere. And I was 1-line item in a night log. I wrote until dawn because if I stopped moving my pen, I could still feel the exact way those nails hooked ice. By first light, the yard looked untouched from a distance, smooth except for wind texture and old drift lines. Up close, the story was there if you knew where to look. At the shed corner, I found impressions deeper than my fist, each one elongated with toe marks that tapered to knife points. In 2 prints, the 4 impressions sat nearly parallel to hind, like the front end had carried weight during a slow pivot. At the base of the propane tank, a crescent of black scoring cut through rime where something hard had dragged and tested grip. I photographed everything with scale card and ruler. I measured stride again. 62 inches, give or take, where the ground was level. The same impossible rhythm. Then I went inside to swap camera cards and found the first thing that made my skin crawl in a different way. My left winter boot wasn't on the mat. The right one sat exactly where I'd left it the night before, toes toward the door, laces looped once. The left was gone. I checked mudroom, hallway, bedroom, truck, porch, snowbank. Nothing. I stood in the kitchen turning in a slow circle, replaying last night. I had come in, set keys by the sink, dropped jacket on the chair, locked both doors. I remembered setting both boots down because I'd done it intentionally, almost superstitiously, like preserving order could keep panic out. I found the missing boot 30 yards out, hanging from the lower branch of a pine behind the propane tank. Not impaled, not shredded, laced by its own top lace, knotted once around the branch as clean as if someone had tied it with gloves on. The toe pointed toward the duplex. I stared at it for a long minute, waiting for my brain to supply a human explanation. Prank. Sleepwalking. One of Mara's boys being stupidly adventurous at dawn. Impossible. They were 15 minutes south and in school. Wind? Wind didn't untie, carry, and knot. I left it where it was long enough to photograph and mark position, then pulled it down with a branch pole because I did not want my bare hands near that knot. The leather smelled like cold rubber and a faint metallic tang, pennies and wet iron. Inside again, another wrongness. My key ring usually hung on the hook by the fridge. Not there. I found it in the sink drain basket under 2 inches of frozen slush, as if someone had packed snow over it and walked away. Front door had still been locked. No signs of forced entry, windows latched. The house wasn't robbed. Wallet, radio charger, service shotgun, all in place. Food untouched. It was as if something had stepped into my routines and rearranged them by 1 inch, just to prove it could. I called Nolan before school started. He answered on the second ring, voice thick with mourning. "You okay?" "No," I said. "Can you come by after classes? I need another set of eyes." Silence for half a beat. The joking tone he'd used weeks ago was gone now. "I can do lunch break around noon, 40 minutes maybe, tell me now." I told him about the sighting by the shed, the forelimb, the nails, the boot on the branch. I left out exactly how my voice shook. He exhaled slowly. "Boot thing could be people. There are no approach tracks but the same prints." "You sure?" "I'm sure." Another pause. "Lockdown today. Don't go hero on this. I'll come." After I hung up, I called Mara and immediately wished I hadn't when she answered in that bright Sunday dinner voice she used when she was trying not to sound worried. "Hey, you working or... Mare, listen. Don't let the boys cut through County Road woods this week. Keep the dogs close." Her tone dropped. "Drake, what happened? Just do it. Did you call your supervisor?" "I'm calling now." I did. Supervisor heard me out, then gave me the same careful cadence as dispatch and DNR had used. Professional, skeptical, trying to keep me within policy lanes. Document all evidence. Avoid solo night checks outside residence perimeter unless necessary. We can review camera placement and maybe request county patrol pass-through, if resources allow. If resources allow, meant no one was coming unless blood was visible from the road. "I need temporary bunk at station," I said, "at least nights." "Station's full this week with snow response personnel. And if this is a large canine, staying in your assigned unit with lights and radio may be best. Keep your sidearm and standard deterrence." I almost laughed. Standard deterrence. Against what exactly? By noon, clouds had moved in thick and low, flattening the light until everything looked like paper. Nolan pulled up in his old pickup, boots, crunching fast across the yard. He took one look at my face and didn't waste words. We walked the tracks together. He crouched at the shed and set his glove in one print for scale. His glove disappeared inside the heel depression. "Jesus," he said softly. At the pine, he examined the bootlace knot and swore under his breath. "You didn't do this to sell me a story." "No." He nodded once, jaw tight. "I know." We went inside for coffee. He stood at the front window like he was taking a fire scene size up, scanning ingress, egress, sight lines. "It's patterning you," he said finally. I didn't answer. He turned. "You hear me? This isn't random crossing anymore. It's checking you. Your schedule, your lights, when you move. Boot thing says it knows your threshold." There it was in plain language. Knows. Not happened to pass by, not displaced by storm. Targeting. He wanted me to come sleep at his place that night. Couch in his den, his old Labrador between us and the door. I almost agreed. Then dispatch pinged an equipment alarm from Station 7 and policy pulled me like a leash. Nolan swore again, same low voice. "At least stay with Mara. Can't bring this to her house." He stared at me hard, then nodded like he hated it. At the door, he put one hand on my shoulder. "You call me anytime I come. I'm not joking anymore." After he left, I checked every room twice. Around 3, I found the third personal violation. The photograph magnet for my fridge, Mara, her husband, the boys in Halloween costumes, all of us squinting in October sun, was gone. I tore through counters, trash, under furniture. Nothing. At dusk, I found it outside, face down in the snow at the bottom of my porch steps, one corner bent, a smear of dark mud over Mara's smile. No other fridge magnets were missing. Just that one. My stomach dropped through the floor. I washed it gently at the sink and propped it by the stove to dry. My hands moved carefully, almost reverent, because anger felt safer than fear for about 30 seconds. Then fear came back bigger. Whatever this was had either entered my house without forcing entry or reached in some way I didn't understand. It had picked one item tied to the people I loved, carried it outside, and left it where I would step on it. That was when prey stopped being metaphor. By evening, the weather service had escalated from advisory to warning. Lake effect bands building, gusts rising overnight, visibility expected to collapse after dark. Dispatch message queue pinged every 10 minutes with road updates, downed lines, stalled vehicles. In good weather, I could have driven to town in 15. In what was coming, County Road could close and strand anyone who guessed wrong about timing. I packed anyway. Not a dramatic bug out, just practical. Go bag, meds, spare socks, hard copies of notes, both casts wrapped in towels, camera cards, flare kit, shotgun case. I called Mara to tell her I was heading south before bands set in. She answered on first ring. "Good, come here. Boys can sleep in the living room. You take Tommy's room." Then her husband came on in the background, voice clipped with mill shift fatigue. "County just posted closures eastbound after 6 if this keeps up. You leave now." I looked out the window. Snow had started as fine grains, almost horizontal in the first gusts. "I'm leaving now." I should have left then. Instead, I made one last sweep because routine is a sickness when you've built your life around checklists. I secured logs by the stove, turned off non-essential breakers, emptied feeder so it wouldn't swing and break in wind. While I was by the feeder, I heard it. 3 soft taps on the siding at the east wall, evenly spaced, shoulder height. I froze with the scoop in my hand. Tap, tap, tap. Not branch strike. Too regular. I backed to the door without turning my shoulders and went inside, locking both doors. Then I stood in the front room with lights off and watched the east wall angle through the window reflection. Nothing moved. I told myself it was wind throwing ice. I almost believed it. At 5:30, I loaded the truck and pulled out. Visibility was already dropping. Headlights bounced off dense flakes and made a white tunnel that erased depth. At the first curve near the old pump house, 2 deer bolted across my beams and vanished into dark, bodies low, tails tucked hard. Half a mile later, my radio crackled with dispatch updates: spun out plow, ambulance delay, county advising non-essential units hold position until bands passed. I keyed in. Unit West duplex en route south. Dispatch came back immediately. Negative West duplex. County road southbound closed at mile marker 9 due jackknifed semi and 0 VS. Recommend return to residence or nearest station. Nearest station would have been safer if I could reach it. I couldn't in that white curtain. I pulled to the shoulder, hazards blinking useless amber into milk, and sat with my jaw locked while snow filled my tire tracks behind me. I turned around and drove back by memory and reflector posts, 10 miles an hour, both hands welded to the wheel. Twice I felt the rear slide and catch. By the time the duplex lights came through the storm, I was shaking with adrenaline and fury so hard I had to put my forehead on the steering wheel before I could trust my legs. Inside, I reported return and got a brisk copy. No one had resources to relocate me. Supervisor texted, hold in place. Avoid outdoor activity unless emergency. Reassess at first light. Hold in place. In other words, sit still in the box it had already mapped. Night dropped fast under storm cloud. By 8 o'clock, I did radio check. By 9 o'clock, I fed the stove. The familiar times felt like mockery now. Little pegs in a board, the whole world had tilted. Wind rose to a sustained roar that made the walls hum. Snow hissed against windows so thick the yard disappeared, then reappeared in brief clears, like a stage set behind smoke. The exterior motion lights tripped twice with no visible cause. At 9:47, the east camera feed went black. At 9:52, the west feed froze on a frame of empty porch and never refreshed. I pulled cards, reset power, cursed at cables gone brittle and cold. Feeds returned for 3 minutes, then died again one by one until only the mudroom interior cam still worked, showing my own pale face passing back and forth like a ghost in a fishbowl. I called dispatch again, keeping voice level through force. Cameras failing during active warning, unknown disturbance possible. Copy camera outage, dispatch said. Could be weather-related interference. Any direct visual? Negative. Maintain shelter. Advise of contact. If contact, like I was waiting on a package. At 10:30, Nolan called. I answered before first ring finished. You at Mara's? He asked. Couldn't get through. Road closure. He swore hard enough I held the phone away. I can come. You won't make it. I can try. No. I looked at the white static outside the window. Stay put. Check on Mara for me if lines drop. Silence, then a grudging, angry breath. You keep me on speaker if anything goes sideways. I will. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table with the shotgun laid out, flare gun beside it, truck fob in my pocket like a talisman. White noise from wind filled every room. Underneath it, every now and then, I thought I heard weight on the porch. One board complaining, then nothing. Might have been thermal contraction. Might have been my own pulse in my ears. Might have been exactly what I thought. At 11:06, the power flickered and came back. At 11:11, it failed entirely. The house dropped into stove glow and storm dark. My emergency lantern threw weak yellow circles that seemed too small to matter. The silence after electrical hum cut out was immense, almost physical. Then came a sound from the front door I had never heard in all my winters there. A slow, deliberate scrape down the outside frame from top hinge to threshold, as if something were testing every inch for give. I did not move toward it. I did not speak. I sat in the dark, flare gun in one hand, shotgun in the other, and understood with cold, absolute clarity that there was no backup coming through that storm. No neighbor hearing me yell, no easy road out. Just me, 2 locked doors, and whatever had learned my routines well enough to arrive when the world was loud enough to hide its footsteps. The scrape ran all the way down the frame and stopped at the threshold with a soft, final tick, like a fingernail tapping glass. I realized I'd stopped breathing and forced air in through my nose, out through my mouth, the same 4-count drill Nolan used to bark at rookies in smokehouses when panic narrowed their vision to a pinhole. In for 4, hold, out for 4, again. Wind hammered the siding. Snow hissed against the windows. The stove popped. Nothing else. Then the front porch board gave one long complaining creak. Not thermal contraction. Weight. I stood and moved sideways to the wall near the window, careful to keep my shadow out of the pane. I used 2 fingers to peel the blackout curtain a fraction. All I saw at first was white static. The beam from my emergency lantern inside reflected off the glass and turned the outside into smeared ghosts, so I killed it with my thumb and let the room fall to stove glow. My eyes adjusted, porch rail, drifting snow, my truck a dark hump in the drive. No shape. A thud sounded at the side of the house, then 2 quick impacts near the mudroom, then silence again. It was moving around me, testing. I should have stayed in the center room and waited for daylight. That would have been the policy answer, the safe answer, if this had been weather and nerves and old wood. But my left hand had gone numb around the flare gun grip, and some part of me understood that if a door failed, reaction time would be all I had. I needed light and sound on my terms, not in a blind panic after something came through. Truck fob in pocket, alarm on panic mode, headlamp in the mudroom cabinet, extra battery lantern by the boots. I kept the shotgun muzzle down but ready and back toward the mudroom, heel to toe, eyes on the front door. Another scrape came, shorter this time, right where the deadbolt sat. Then 3 soft taps at shoulder height on the wood. Tap, 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 exactly the rhythm from the east wall before I tried to leave. I reached the mudroom and turned just enough to pull the cabinet open. My fingers found the headlamp strap, and I slipped it on over my knit cap. Click, low beam first. The narrow cone lit rubber mats, my hanging coat, a row of thawing gloves. I didn't point it out the window yet. A shadow crossed the frosted pane. Not a darting branch, not blowing debris. A broad, deliberate occlusion that blocked half the glass and kept moving. I froze. The shadow slid past and vanished toward the porch. Every instinct I had screamed to bolt for the truck, but the truck sat 30 feet of exposed yard away under whiteout, and if I ran, I'd have to turn my back. Predators key on that. Every ranger knows it. Every prey animal in these woods knows it. Running would hand it the script. My thumb found the fob through my coat pocket. I stepped to the mudroom outer window and angled my headlamp out through the blowing snow. For 1 second, all I caught was motion. Dark against white. Low, then high. Like something shifting between postures faster than my brain could process. Then it stepped fully into the beam 10 yards from my porch. It was real, not a trick of stormlight. Not a wolf enlarged by fear, not 2 deer overlapping. It stood on 2 legs in the open yard, almost level with the lower branches of the feeder pole, shoulders wider than a man in winter gear, torso barrel-thick under banded dark gray fur matted with ice. The chest rose and fell in heavy bellows that vented steam in pulses. Its head sat forward on a thick neck, muzzle long and narrow like a canid's but deeper at the jaw hinge, built to bite and hold. Triangular ears, pinned tight to the skull. One flank showed patchy fur with slick skin beneath. A long seam of old scar tissue that shone pale when my beam caught it. Its legs were wrong in the way nightmares are wrong. Digitigrade, hocks high, bent for explosive drive, ending in feet that had made those impossible prints. Elongated, powerful. Toe tips dark and curved. Its forelimbs hung too long for a human frame and ended not in paws but in hand-like structures. 5 black claws on one, maybe 4, and a vestigial 5th on the other, each curved like hooked roofing nails. They flexed open and closed against the snow with deliberate control. And the eyes. Amber, yes, but not flat reflector glow, like deer in a spotlight. Focused. Tracking me through the mudroom glass with intent that felt individual, directed, almost evaluative. The same fixed stare from the cedar edge, now close enough that I could see the muscles around the sockets tighten when it scented the air. It lifted its muzzle and opened its mouth. The teeth were layered. Long, shearing canines in front, then interlocking blades along the sides. Not broad, crushing molars like a bear, flesh scissor teeth, designed to slice. The smell hit a beat later, somehow through storm drafts and door seams, metallic like pennies and blood. Underneath it, a sweet rot like meat, left too long in a freezer that failed. I heard myself make a sound, Dunnock. Not a word, just raw throat. And that seemed to trigger it. It dropped from bipedal stance to a lower crouch in 2 fluid steps, forelimbs taking weight, hindquarters coiling. Charge posture. Training overrode terror by a hair. I slapped the truck fob panic button. My truck exploded into sound and light. Horn blasting in frantic pulses. Hazard lamps strobing amber red through blowing snow. The creature flinched hard, head snapping toward the noise, lips peeling back. It shifted 1 step away from me, not retreat, just recalculation. I used that half-second. I thumbed the flare gun open, seated a marine flare I'd already loaded, snapped it shut, and kicked the mudroom outer door with my boot to crack it just enough to fire through without exposing my body. Wind knifed in. Snow swirled across the threshold. The creature turned back, eyes locking on movement. I fired low across the yard. The flare screamed out red-white and struck the snowbank between us, ricocheted, then burned in place with blinding magnesium glare. Heat bloomed instantly, a hissing furnace in the storm. The yard went from black and white to violent red daylight. Shadows jumped and stretched. For a split second, the thing was etched in perfect detail against the glare. Wet nose, scarred flank, cords of muscle under fur, claws splayed in irritation, pupils narrowed to razor slits. It recoiled 2 steps, not in fear exactly, but in sensory overload. 1 forelimb rising to shield its eyes. I backed, never turning my shoulders, and slammed the mudroom steel inner door shut with my hip. The latch caught. I dropped the crossbar into its brackets so hard, metal rang through the house. Impact came less than a second later. The porch erupted with a crack like a gunshot as something heavy hit the outer door and rail together. The frame shuddered. Dust dropped from the header seam. The truck alarm kept screaming outside, now muffled by wood and storm, lights strobing through cracks like lightning. Another hit. Then a rapid series of gouging scrapes down the frame, claws digging for purchase. The outer door boomed inward half an inch and snapped back. The steel door behind it held, but the crossbar flexed in its mounts. With a whining protest I felt through my palms. I planted my boots, shotgun up, muzzle at center mass where a breech would appear. My finger stayed indexed along the guard, not on trigger. If it came through, there'd be one shot before contact range, maybe two. I knew it. My body knew it. My entire life narrowed to door geometry and angles. Outside, it paced the porch in heavy, deliberate footfalls. 3 steps left, pause. 3 steps right, pause. Nails clicked on wood, then rasped again along the frame at deadbolt height. Once, something struck near the window and glass crazed with a spiderweb crack, but didn't shatter. I don't know exactly how long it lasted. Later, when I reconstructed from the truck alarm cycle and dispatched timestamps, it was under a minute of direct assault. In my head, it was an hour stretched on a rack. Then it stopped. No footfalls, no scrape, just storm and horn and my own blood in my ears. I held position, counting breaths, waiting for a feint. 30 seconds. A minute. 2. The truck alarm timed out into sudden quiet, so absolute it was obscene. In that silence, I heard it again, farther now. Heavy steps descending porch stairs, crossing crusted snow, circling the house once at measured pace. Not running. Not panicked. A perimeter check. Like it wanted me to hear that it could choose its line and keep moving. The steps reached the stand of pines behind the propane tank. Then nothing. I did not move for a long time. Eventually my knees gave out and I slid down the wall onto the mudroom floor, shotgun still aimed at the door, flare gun empty beside me. My hands shook so hard the barrel wobbled in visible arcs. I locked my elbows against my ribs to steady it and stayed like that in stove glow and dark, eyes pinned to the seam under the steel door, expecting at any second to see claws hook underneath. No claws came. I radioed dispatch at 11:19, voice broken but intelligible. West duplex. Possible attempted entry by unknown large predator. Structural impact at front porch. Request priority response at first safe travel. Static. Then, copy West duplex. Units unable due weather closure. Hold secure. Reassess at first light. Hold secure. I laughed once, sharp and ugly, because there was nothing else to do. I stayed on that floor until dawn with the shotgun across my lap and the stove dying low, ears tuned to every creak and gust. Twice I thought I heard movement. Both times it was wind-rolling drifts against siding. By 3 o'clock, my right foot had gone pins and needles numb. By 4:30, my jaw hurt from clenching. At some point before first light, I realized my palms were wet and looked down to see shallow crescent cuts, where I'd gripped the flare gun hard enough for the checkering to break skin. When gray finally bled into the windows, I still waited another 20 minutes before approaching the front. I lifted the crossbar, opened the steel inner door a crack, then the outer. Cold hit like a slap. The porch looked like a car wreck. 2 joists at the top step were split clean, through where impact had landed, The left rail was torqued outward, screws partially pulled from brackets. The outer door frame carried 4 deep parallel gouges from hinge height to threshold, each cut sunk through paint and into wood, spacing too wide for any known local canine. The window beside the door was starred but intact. Snow across the porch was churned into a hard, dirty crust. Tracks led off exactly as before, from my door around the duplex to the pines. At 11 yards, they disappeared again into clean drift. No blood, no fur caught in splinters. Nothing I could bag and tag except measurements and damage photos. I moved through the motions because motion kept me from dropping. Photos with ruler, voice notes, quick structural check for immediate collapse. Then I threw the go bag in the truck, set the shotgun in the passenger footwell, and drove to the ranger station as soon as county lifted minimal travel. Halfway there, the adrenaline dump hit, and my body quit pretending. My hands started trembling so violently I had to pull over twice. My hearing in my left ear rang with a high, constant whine from the alarm and impact blasts. At a stop sign near town, my vision tunneled and I had to press my forehead to the steering wheel, breathe 4 count until the black specks receded. I kept seeing the eyes in the beam every time I blinked. At the station, fluorescent lights made everything too bright. I must have looked rough because the front desk clerk stood up before I even spoke and asked if I'd been in a crash. I said, "No crash. Need supervisor, now." Supervisor met me in the equipment room, took one look at my hands and pointed to the sink. "Clean up first." The water stung the cuts. Pink ribbons ran into the drain. He handed me a first aid packet and waited. I gave him the short version. Power outage during warning. Possible unknown large predator at residence. Attempted entry. Porch structural damage. No discharge of shotgun. 1 flare deployed. No civilian injuries. I kept my voice clipped and professional. Report cadence. He listened with brows tight, asked for timeline, asked if I'd consumed alcohol, asked if I had direct visual confirmation of species. There was a tone. Not mocking exactly. Cautious, managerial. Already sorting my words into boxes that could survive county review. I said direct visual of large animal, species undetermined due conditions. He nodded once, relieved at that phrasing, and slid incident forms across the table. I sat for 2 hours writing and rewriting one document that would decide whether anyone took the threat seriously or took me off duty for psychological evaluation. I described dimensions of damage. I attached photos of the gouges, joists, and tracks. I used the phrase unknown, large, dark predator behavior 3 separate times. I logged the timeline down to minute marks from phone and radio. I noted previous track anomalies and camera outages during storm. I did not write. It stood on 2 legs and watched me like a person. I did not write. It took my boot, moved my keys, removed 1 family photo from my fridge. I did not write. I smelled its breath from 10 yards, and it smelled like blood and rot, because I had heard enough in the pause before my supervisor's questions, because DNR had already labeled prints as likely distortion from melt and drift, because dispatch had bigger emergencies than one ranger with a story that sounded like internet poison. Because if I wrote what I actually saw, the report would become about me, not the damage, and the only immediate result would be me losing clearance, losing field authority, maybe losing the job that had been my whole structure. So I filed the version that could be filed. Unknown predator. Structural damage. recommend temporary relocation and hazard assessment. The county maintenance team inspected the duplex that afternoon once roads were passable. Their report called it significant impact consistent with large force, flagged porch repairs, replaced the outer frame, and suggested motion lighting upgrades. One guy with a tape measure squinted at the gouges and muttered, "Big cat, maybe," though no cat in Michigan makes that spacing or that height. Another said maybe a black bear out of den too early, in February, in that storm. I didn't argue. I signed forms and went quiet. Nolan drove out the next day despite my telling him not to. He stood on the porch in a borrowed parka, looked at the split joists, then at the gouges, then at me. No jokes, no smoky. "Jesus," he said softly. "I'm sorry," I said. "For what?" "For laughing before." He ran a thumb along one gouge, measured spacing against his hand, and went pale. "That's not coyotes and nerves." "No." He stayed 2 hours helping me board the cracked window and relocate gear to the station storage room. On the way out, he said, "You answer your phone every night. I don't care if it's 1 a.m., you answer." I told him I would. Mara's reaction landed harder. She saw the porch in person that Sunday, insisted on driving up once roads cleared, brought the boys only as far as the truck, then came inside alone. She touched the repaired frame with 2 fingers like it might burn, turned to me and said, "You're done living here." "I have a lease. You can break a lease. You can't undie. I'm handling it." "No," she said, voice rising. "You are documenting it. That is not the same thing." We fought in my kitchen with the stove popping between us. She cried halfway through and got angrier about crying. I got cold and procedural, which is what I do when people I love are right and I don't want them to be. In the end, she won the practical argument. Where I sleep matters less than pride. Within 6 weeks, I transferred out of winter field duty into a fire lookout training role downstate, mostly classroom and tower ops support until spring season. Paperwork called it operational reassignment. Everyone involved pretended it was about staffing balance and professional development. We all knew better. I surrendered the duplex lease early. I moved what mattered into a small rental closer to Traverse City, where streetlights bleed through curtains and neighbors argue about snowblowers instead of whatever watches tree lines. I kept my patrol truck for a while, then rotated into a pool vehicle because seeing that dented fender in my driveway every day made my chest tighten. At Mara's farmhouse, I replaced both exterior doors with reinforced steel core units and longer strike plates, then added a crossbar kit she teased me about until she realized I wasn't joking. I installed motion lights on all corners, swapped old locks, and put window film on the back sliders. Her husband watched me drill and said, "You think this is necessary?" I answered, "I hope not," and kept drilling. I stopped taking solitary winter assignments entirely. Not requested, not offered, not just for a week. If the schedule put me alone in remote housing after dark, I traded shifts or took admin work. Some coworkers assumed I'd gotten soft. Let them. Relationships changed in small abrasions. Nolan became a nightly constant. At 8:30, almost without fail, my phone buzzes. Sometimes we talk 10 minutes about nothing. Shop class kids gluing their fingers together. My nephew's obsession with salamanders. Whether the lions will break hearts again. Sometimes we sit in silence while he listens to me breathe, if a windstorm has my nerves lit. He never says, "You sure you saw what you saw?" Again. Mara went the other direction. fierce protection that sometimes feels like a choke collar. She checks county radar before I drive. She texts if I'm 10 minutes late to Sunday dinner. She banned me from rural roads after dark unless absolutely necessary. We've had more than one argument where she says, "I can't lose you," and I say, "I'm still here," and neither of us believes it fully in that moment. Dating became nearly impossible. If I tell the sanitized version, rough winter, close call with predator, people nod politely and drift. If I tell a little more, I watch their faces do the math between concern and disbelief. If I tell the truth, I sound unstable. So mostly I don't date. Busy season is easier than "I can't promise I won't flinch at taps on your siding." Officially, the incident sits in a file as wildlife hazard and storm damage. Unofficially, I have a locked metal box in my hall closet with everything the file doesn't hold. The 2 casts, printed photos with measurements, camera cards that show mostly static and 1 frame of blurred movement near the propane tank, my notebook pages from that month, and the bent fridge magnet of Mara and the boys with a faint mud stain that never fully washed out. I open that box less than I used to. At first I checked it weekly, then monthly, then only when sleep deprivation starts whispering that maybe memory embellished, maybe fear stitched separate events into one monster-shaped seam. On those nights, I lay the evidence on my table, run fingertips over cast ridges, and remind myself that joists don't split from imagination. Now I work seasonal wildfire prevention education near Traverse City. Spring through early fall, I run school talks, community burn permit workshops, defensible space assessments for homeowners who think wet leaves can't ignite until they do. I like the work. It's still public service, still practical. Fire is terrifying but legible. It follows fuel, wind, topography. Even when it jumps a line, the physics exist. Winter is harder. Not because anything has happened again, nothing like that night has repeated, but because first snowfall turns my body into an old alarm clock, wound too tight. On the season's first accumulating snow, I wake before sunrise, whether I want to or not. I stand at my front window with coffee gone cold and check the doorstep before I unlock anything. Every year. No exceptions. I sleep with 2 white noise machines now, one by the bed and one near the hallway, to flatten random night sounds into a steady wash my nervous system can tolerate. Sudden taps still spike me upright. Scrape sounds, shovel against concrete, branch on siding, put me on my feet before I'm awake. I keep a flashlight on each floor and a flare kit in the mudroom, though I live in town where using one would wake half the block. Some habits fade anyway. I feed birds again. Took me a long time, but I do. Chickadees came back the first winter in Traverse, and I almost cried over tiny footprints on a feeder tray, which is not a sentence I ever expected to say. Coyotes yip in the green belt some nights, and the sound scares me less than silence now. People ask if they hear pieces of the story through Nolan or Mara what I think it was. Dogman, they say, half joking, like naming folklore makes it smaller. I don't use that word. I don't use any word that pretends classification equals control. I can tell you what I know. I know something large left tracks that matched no pattern I could reconcile with weather distortion. I know it approached my front door more than once and stood there long enough to shift its weight. I know it learned my routines. When I'd be home, where I kept things, what would unsettle me most. I know it could move on 2 legs and 4 with equal confidence. I know it it tested boundaries until a storm gave it cover to push harder. I know sound and light up bought me enough seconds to live, and I know that whatever intelligence looked back at me through that snow was not confusion, not random animal panic. It was attention. That's the part people struggle with, even the ones who believe the rest. Predatory intelligence feels too close to human to sit comfortably in the woods we think we understand. Maybe there's a biological explanation still undiscovered. Maybe there's one individual malformed by injury and hunger and adaptation. Maybe there are things in remote winters that don't fit our categories and don't care whether we have names ready. I don't need agreement anymore. I needed that at first. Needed someone official to say, yes, this happened. This is real. You're not breaking. Years out, validation matters less than survival and honesty with myself. My story ends without a trophy, without a tagged specimen, without neat closure in a case file. It ends with a repaired porch, a transferred job, a family that watches me too closely because they almost didn't get to, and a man who still checks the threshold when snow is new. Routine used to mean control. Then, for a while, it meant bait. Now it means something else. Choices made on purpose. Lock the door, check the weather, call your people. Keep the flare loaded. Listen when the woods go quiet. And on first snow, before sunrise, look down before you step out.